that idyllic childhood had sort of absolutely been turned upside down. Everything just vanished. It was like the ground from underneath me disappeared.
Your story and what you've done is, I think, amazingly inspiring.
What's the conversation that I need to stop? It just creates this space that's amazing where it can take you.
That strong sense of purpose is often linked to something greater than themselves.
We have a pretty audacious mission. We want to change the futures of 1 million women and children by 2040. And that's the legacy that I'd love to leave.
Welcome to the Being Human podcast with Amelia and Jez Francis. Brought to you by Just Add Water.
Hello, I'm Amelia
And I'm Jez Francis, and welcome to the Being Human podcast, where with special guests, we continue to explore what it means to be human in this world we find ourselves living in. So, Amelia, you've had a weekend away with your family, haven't you? How was it?
Yeah, it was absolutely brilliant. I had a lovely weekend in the Cotswolds with, my mum, my dad, my brother, and then my boyfriend Luke and Harry's girlfriend Hester came along as well. So the six of us stayed in a lovely Airbnb, enjoying walks in the countryside, negotiating pathways with sheep, cattle, and some lovely friendly-faced alpacas. Oh. We visited some cute little countryside towns, the ones that have all the houses absolutely smothered in ivy, and did a spot of wine tasting as well. The reason why we went is because Harry is joining the army this year. So suddenly his time is going to become quite precious, and getting a weekend away as the six of us was just something really special to do before he goes, but something that we all said that we absolutely need to continue doing and not let the years go by without spending some quality time together. So really nice weekend. But what about you, Jez? What's going on in your world?
Well, you mentioned your brother's decision to join the army, and that as a result you won't see so much of him. Yeah. In a few short weeks, our son, Henry, is off to Australia for a year. His love of sports, and cricket in particular, has opened some doors for him. So he's going to be joining an academy in Adelaide and playing for a club side there for the upcoming season. So we're going to miss him terribly. But I really admire his courage and confidence and his decision to follow his passion to the other side of the world. At such a young age. Yeah,
that's so exciting, and best of luck to Henry. I'm sure he's going to have absolutely brilliant time, especially thinking about us heading into winter here in the UK, and he's going to be playing cricket in the outdoors Australian summer. I think we're all going to be incredibly jealous. Which, speaking of Australia, actually, I feel like we should be doing a quick shout out to our Just Add Water Australia team who launched earlier this year in Sydney and Brisbane. They're doing an absolutely brilliant job and have some really exciting work coming up. And we've also got an Australian guest on the podcast today. So this really is the episode from Down Under.
Let's get our brilliant guest on.
Joining us on the Being Human podcast today is Melanie Greblo, a social innovator who has dedicated her life to catalysing and leading social and environmental change. Mel is the founder and CEO of Humans of Purpose, an impact venture to achieve safe, social and economic participation for women who face multiple barriers to employment, particularly survivors of domestic and family violence. Through her work at Humans of Purpose, Mel was awarded the 2023 Snow Entrepreneur for her inspiring work in social change and innovation. But Humans of Purpose is not her only endeavour. Inspired by her own lived experiences, Mel has founded and led multiple social and not-for-profit organisations to fulfil her purpose of making the world a better place for others than when she found it. Mel, welcome to the Being Human podcast.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Well, just to ease us into things, we've got some get-to-know-you questions, if we may. So let's start with a Just Add Water favourite. What's the last book you really enjoyed and why?
Well, the last book I read and really enjoyed actually was written by one of my best friends, and it's called Unconventional Women. And it's a story of a closed order of nuns in Melbourne, Australia. And obviously I read it because my wonderful friend wrote it, but it's actually an inspiring read about these formidable women back in the day who left their families at 15, 16, 18, however old they were, and entered this closed order where they were basically then shut off from the rest of the world. Was the order of the Blessed Sacrament. So I just loved it. And from a historical perspective, they were feminists before that was even a thing. It was just, I loved it.
Mel, if you could instantly become an expert in something that you currently know nothing about, what would it be?
Wow, that's such a good question, isn't it? If I could have all the knowledge I could to become an expert in human rights law, that's what I'd love to have, really deep expertise.
That's a great answer. Where is the next place on your bucket list that you want to go on holiday?
I've had this one on my bucket list for a long time, actually. So I love the work of a poet. His name is David Whyte, Whyte, and he sort of grew up in the northwest of England, and he had an Irish mother and a Welsh father, and he now lives in the North Pacific in America. But he hosts these annual walking tours in Ireland, and a lot of his poetry is very, just draws on all that beautiful mythology and poetry of that beautiful tradition, the Irish tradition, and everything he learnt from wandering the places as a child as well. So I'd love to go on a walking tour with him.
That would be brilliant, wouldn't it? That sounds right up my street as well. Combining kind of story and environment and place and nature. Yeah, that sounds fabulous.
And he works with these fabulous Irish musicians that go on the kind of tour with him, and so they're playing music, and they, you pop up into a pub at the end of the day when you're walking, and they'll get the fiddles out, and it's
amazing.
Really fabulous. So.
I can imagine it. I can actually imagine it. Yeah, sounds brilliant. Oh, you've inspired me, Mel. Thank you.
Careful,
we might end up there on the same walk.
I was going to say, careful what you wish for, Mel. So, Mel, the topic for our conversation today is all about purpose, and that word means a lot of different things to different people. So if we could start by asking you, what does the word purpose mean for you?
I think we're all meaning-making creatures, human beings, and maybe I was just a little more so even as a child. I kind of had this weird fascination with death from a very early age. I think as soon as I became aware of the fact that people and animals died and that was finite, I was quite obsessed with it, and just curious all the time to learn more and wonder. I wasn't scared. I was just really abnormally kind of obsessed. And I think that started, I knew then I was just curious. And I think, purpose to me is about meaning making and because there's no inherent meaning to life, I don't think. We make that meaning ourselves, and I think that's where purpose comes in. Yeah.
I agree entirely. I think we crave meaning and kind of a sort of an explanation for things, don't we? And it's why children ask why, why all the time.
That's a interesting point about recognising that you've only got a certain period of time to do something or to make meaning of your world. So recognising that and then wanting to fulfil that with as much as you can, is something that's striking a chord with me.
Now, you mentioned when you were a child. Just expand on that for a little bit for us, if you wouldn't mind. What was life like for you growing up?
I had a really beautiful, idyllic childhood when I think about it and look back. I came from a very middle-class family, two very loving parents who worked hard. My mum was a nurse, and then moved into the kind of human services space. My dad ran his own company as a builder, and later on became a winemaker and vigneron. So that's what he still does to this day. But we just grew up in a regional town in the southeastern part of Australia, in the middle of Victoria. There's about 100,000 people. I went to the local Catholic primary school, went on to the local Catholic high school with all the same friends and people. And so I guess that, there was a beautiful kind of community that we had, and big enough that it wasn't, stifling, but small enough that I wanted to get out as soon as I could and explore the world.
Yeah.
When did meaning or a sense of purpose become like really important to you? You know, was there a significant moment in your life that challenged you to question, you know, why am I here?
Yes, definitely. So I was finishing my degree at university when my younger sister, 2 years younger than me, was diagnosed with cancer, and she had her leg amputated to try to save her life, and then a year after that, she died. And so, you know, I would finish university by that stage, and that was sort of 6 months after I finished, and you know, when I finished, I thought I had the world at my feet, and all of those things you work towards as a young person, teenager, the dreams you think, you know, are important. Everything just vanished. It was like the ground from underneath me disappeared. Nothing was sure anymore. Nothing was solid. That idyllic childhood had sort of absolutely been turned upside down. Yeah, and that was definitely the kind of catalytic kind of time of my life, I think, where I was pretty lost for a while, you know, at least 6 months, just really grief-stricken, really, and probably traumatized. And um, that, you know, I actually sort of stumbled into some jobs that were working with people, young women actually, who were at risk of homelessness in Melbourne. And yeah, I found enormous purpose in that, and sort of took me out of my own world of grief. And yeah, I could empathize with other people going through really tough things as well. So it's not to say it made it all easier or better, but it was definitely the start of knowing that there was some bigger purpose and meaning to my life now, and it would just never be anything else now. I just knew that, yeah, I think holding her hand while she took her last breaths was something I'd ever expected to do, and it changed everything for my life, really.
In those early jobs that you described, you know, working with women who are homeless, were you aware then that you had arrived in a sort of a vocation or a calling that was going to shape everything that you then went on to do subsequently?
Probably not for a little while, actually. I think it was just a bit of a soft place to land, that workplace. You know, I was finished university thinking that I'd go into the corporate world, into some big communications agency or firm, or and do kind of, you know, more corporate communications work. And then I landed here, and yeah, there were these incredibly creative young women who, through disadvantage, I guess, and lots of probably exposure to trauma and drugs and alcohol, they'd lost their way. And so I think I really enjoyed that work, but I think it was also just a really soft place to land, and a supportive team environment that could support me whilst I was going through what I was going through. So it wasn't until, I guess, I then took a role with the Australian Teenage Cancer Patients Society and moved to Sydney for that role. And so that's when I really started to feel like, okay, you can do jobs in the world that really make a difference. and that's probably where it started. And then it would have really taken hold, I think, a few years later, when I was working in Sydney at the Benevolent Society. And that was absolutely pivotal and catalytic in terms of what I wanted to do with my life. From an impact perspective, I was sort of introduced to people and ideas and innovations through that job, both in Australia and abroad, that I just thought was mind-blowingly incredible. And so, you know, people talking way back then about social enterprise, and examples coming out of the UK of just ordinary people who transformed whole, you know, neighbourhoods that were sort of cycling through generations of entrenched disadvantage. So, and breaking those cycles. So that was really exciting to see.
So you're now the founder and CEO of Humans of Purpose. Could you share with us the journey of how you started that organisation and where it's heading?
Yeah. I guess the kind of seed was planted maybe back in 2020, 2021. And it was kind of coming out the other side of my own kind of lived experience of domestic and family violence, but more kind of post-separation challenges, and really finding a lot of the way that the systems were really challenging and difficult. And I'd often sort of stop and think, wow, this is all really hard for me, who's an educated, connected, resourced, self-employed woman with loads of family and friends around to support. What's it like for people who are not like, in my position and not as lucky as I was? And you don't have to you'd have to be living under a rock, particularly lately in Australia, to know that the crisis around domestic and family violence is just huge and growing, it seems. And so I sort of did some more looking into what was going on, and could see that, women were really up against it in terms of trying to find their way forward after experiencing domestic and family violence, particularly so that they didn't lose that kind of connection to their capacity to participate economically. Most of them kind of lost their financial independence, and research has sort of since come out to say that women in domestic and family violence actually face the stark choice, and that is to either stay in the violence or leave and be plunged into poverty. It's kind of that black and white. So I knew that, my being self-employed was one of the keys that helped me survive all of that and get through and still keep a roof over my head and my children's. And even though it was really difficult, again, I thought, well, there's got to be work that we can support women to do at home in their own time, flexibly, remotely, and designed for that. And so, as I said, about trying to create an employment model and a business model that would actually allow that to happen. And that's how Humans of Purpose was born.
And what are you excited about for, the sort of future of Humans of Purpose? How's it all going?
It's going really well. It's quite amazing. It's a massive challenge to create a social impact business. It's almost like I describe it as sort of trying to start two businesses at the same time, because if you're really serious about the impact, you're kind of building that into what an ordinary business model would be. And so they're not always supportive of each other. Trying to create social impact in a business can often drain the profitability of a business. Obviously, just going for profitability alone, you're really going to kind of, skimp on the impact. So it's finding the balance all the time. We've probably had about 200 women come into our academy, and they participate in weekly masterclasses, mentoring, coaching, a whole lot of different professional and personal development learning opportunities. A lot of it's all kind of curated around the 3 pillars of best practice trauma recovery. So even, we kind of recognise that we could find a woman a job, put her in that job, 3 weeks later she's left the job, or she's had to quit or been fired because she just can't sustain it. So we really talk about sort of walking women over a bridge from that kind of mindset of being a victim and that the world's happened to me and these terrible things have happened and I will never get over it, to a much sort of stronger growth mindset and it's not as simple as saying you need to start thinking like this. It's that part of the journey we take women on is long and quite intensive and takes a lot of care, compassion and all of those other things. So but once they're over that bridge, it's like this light gets turned on. You can see it in their face. They're different and they're ready to sort of face the world and their future differently to how they arrived through our virtual doors. We offer digital skills training, and then the idea of the model is then women will be able to transition into work in our business as digital heroes in our digital business, or we transition them into external employer partners who then provide the employment, and we continue to provide all those other wraparound supports. So we've had in the last 10 months, 10 women have come to work in our business, and they're all sustaining that employment and we've just put out our first survey to survey the membership and the participants, and it's just mind-boggling what's coming back and the feedback that we're getting. It's very humbling, and I have this incredible sense of it's very weird. It's like pride. It's like for them or of them. It's really incredible that they've gone from being, shells in some instances of humans to these, women who are smiling and really ready to take the reins on their life again and make it, better for them and their children.
And I'm curious, Mel, are there in the sort of the feedback and the things that they're saying, are there things that are surprising you?
That's a really good question. I really haven't done the analysis on it enough yet because some of the responses are still coming in. But, well, surprising? I don't know. But one of the things that came through in terms of the ones that haven't secured employment yet and what the block still is that really around what they say the biggest barrier still is kind of their capacity to job search and apply for jobs, which is really interesting because we actually provide a lot of coaching around that. So it actually, if you kind of look at it through a trauma-informed lens, it actually you take a few steps back and you can see that there's still actually a massive block to making that big leap towards this is my life now. I can stay at home and not be seen to, okay, if I really am serious about this, I need to be out there in the world again, and it can feel really unsafe. So a lot of it is still about their self-confidence, and which is probably not that surprising. Yeah, I think it's just what we did from the very outset was co-design everything that we do with women with lived experience. So we tapped into the real problems that they face, applied that sort of design thinking approach and design to solve for the problems that we were hearing that they had, rather than just, putting together a bunch of things and hoping that it would help. So that bit's been really, I guess, rewarding to see that their design has been exactly what they needed.
I think the work that you're doing just sounds absolutely incredible, and hopefully, more, because as you were talking about the issue that's obviously in Australia, it's something that's mentioned in the UK, and I'm sure it's global, it's everywhere. So, your story and what you've done is, I think, amazingly inspiring. The fact you say you've got pride in it, I think is brilliant. So, yeah, a little appreciation note.
Oh, thank you.
And you've got the podcast as well with Humans of Purpose. So this is your time to plug. Tell us a bit about what the podcast's about and why people should listen, and maybe, who's been one of your favourite guests and why?
So we've only recently taken the reins of the podcast, actually. It's been around for 7 years. And Mike Davies first got the podcast off the ground here in Australia. And the intention, was really to talk to the people who are driving kind of purposeful initiatives, whether it's in the not-for-profit or business sector, the arts, the science, whatever it might be. And so I've only been in the host seat for the last maybe 6 weeks and thoroughly enjoying it. And I guess I could only comment on the guests that I've interviewed so far in terms of, do I have a favourite? I don't know. They all bring something so unique, the conversations, don't they?
Maybe something that has that you've learned or that really stands out to you as a kind of an aha moment.
I think it's more actually the collective of purpose-driven leaders, and that I'm just in awe of people that still, wake up every day to make the world a better place. And I think that's, if that's the aha, if there is an aha moment, it's still around that, there's a lot going on in the world that you could get depressed about. There's this kind of meta poly crisis that we're all kind of facing between conflict and war and climate change, and it's a lot, existential things. And I think the bit that really gives me hope and is everyone else that wakes up to still, in spite of all of that, make the world a better place in whatever way they can. So, yeah, that's the aha, I think, that there are so many people like that, and it's amazing.
It's really energizing, isn't it, to be with people like that have a strong sense of why they're here. They have something that they stand for and believe in, and they hold themselves to that. And they're often quite humble as well, I find, sort of purpose-led people. And so with that comes the sense I've always found that you feel safe in their company, and you can trust them, and that zing and zest for what it is they're doing almost... you can feel it.
Contagious, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly
contagious
the word.
Is the word.
It's a joy to be around people like that. And I mean, one guest actually, the episode's coming out next week on the podcast, Hannah Asafiri. She probably started one of the first social enterprises in Australia back in 1998. She wouldn't have called it that then, but this was a woman who endured extreme hardship as a child and trauma, like extreme, and then was married off into an arranged marriage at 15 here in Australia, and broke out of that, and it was an incredibly violent relationship in the end. So she spent the good part of her entire childhood and early adulthood being severely abused. And what she's done with her life, it actually ended up having a tear at the end of the podcast with her, and I'm kind of getting quite emotional again now. The joy and the love that she has for humanity, despite what she has endured and experienced, is just phenomenal. And she opened up a Moroccan soup bar in Melbourne in 1998 to support women from various cultural backgrounds and refugees and other women who are trying to leave domestic violence, and taught them how to cook, but more than that, just be together around food and meals and sharing, and the joy of sharing a meal together and nourishing each other, feeding each other. And then she hosted these amazing things called Speed Data Muslim, which were just kind of dialogue sessions so that you could understand, the cultural and religious background and traditions, so that it would reduce Islamophobia. And just mind-blowing. She just released a book called The Audacity to Be Free, which I haven't read yet. So it's people like that there's just the joy and the humanity and the hope that she has still for the world to be better. And she knows it will be. Like she says, might not be in my lifetime, but it will happen.
I think there's also there's something around for people that are, leaving school or university and education, to know that there are all these amazing people doing this amazing stuff through the lens of purpose-driven organisations, and knowing that there is so much out there. Whereas, sometimes from schools and universities, the narrative can be to join these big corporations, and you think that you should be going down one way. And actually, listening to things like your podcast or hearing some of the stories that you're talking about and where else you could get involved in, I think is so important for people to have more awareness of, and just open doors for everyone to be making an impact in, whatever that thing is that you feel really passionate about, that, you can either start up something yourself if you've got that probably that hardship and that entrepreneurial spirit, or there's probably some people that are contributing to that cause that you can go and get involved in. And I think the more stories that you hear, the more you realise people are doing all these brilliant things. That story just sounds amazing, what that woman's gone through and what she's doing now.
Yeah. Certainly, I know in Australia we've moved the dial a little bit. We've still got a long way to go in terms of education and exposing young people to these concepts and ideas, and not just the run of the mill. This is what you've got to go to school and then university and go off and do this. And I mean, we know the world's just not like that anymore.
No.
And universities are really embracing sort of social innovation and those sorts of things as well, which is so great, because it just wasn't a thing when I was at school or left, that's for sure.
You touched on it earlier on, Mel, when you talked about the challenges of creating a social impact venture, and at the same time the need for that to be commercially viable in order to fulfill its purpose. Are there other challenges that you face?
I actually feel that it was certainly that the two never need to be mutually exclusive, that you can't do both. And certainly that, any business needs to be sustainable to have its impact, whether it's just selling widgets, to just being able to continue to sell widgets, or whether it's being able to sell widgets and create an impact. So it's kind of necessary, that commercial sustainability of an organisation or business. But actually not. I actually really believe that the world of business as we know it is evolving, and it won't be long. Obviously you can see it in the corporate world. There really is a lot more kind of, I guess, activism, whether it's shareholder activism or other consumer activism around what people will and won't tolerate from business. And it's just going to keep driving change. And I think, certainly for corporations, without a kind of social license to operate, many will fall by the wayside. And likewise, any other business that isn't really interested in solving for real problems, I think is actually going to, that we just see a huge change, I think, in the next sort of decade. And certainly as that kind of intergenerational transfer of wealth happens, which is sort of starting to happen now, that'll make a monumental difference to the way people do business.
Have you ever felt disconnected from your purpose? And if you have, how did that feel and how did you navigate through that?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's definitely been times in my life where, I have felt quite disconnected from really passionately being, connected to purpose, and it's really hard. And then I find it again in something, and I feel incredibly fortunate that somehow I find it, because, often I meet people who are in this just total funk with their lives, with their careers, and they kind of, they say the words, I just feel like I don't have a purpose. And it's interesting because it's not something you can actually tell people how to go and find. It's not really teachable. It's, I guess it's first asking yourself the question of the things about what you love and what you value, and then trying to kind of orient your life towards more of that rather than more of what you don't love and what you don't value. That's a good place to start, I think. But for me, it was, I guess I'm a problem solver really at heart. And so where I see things that are broken, I can't help but be curious about how you could either look at it from a different angle or perspective, and where the system's kind of problems are, or cracks that you could kind of really do something with and innovate around to solve those problems. So my purpose seems to come from that seeing the problem and then getting really curious and sometimes creative about how to solve the problem.
What other thoughts do you have about how people can, for those that are either struggling or in that funk, as you describe it, how they can take the first step forward?
Yeah, look, I think for a lot of people who are in careers that's just sort of followed the natural kind of trajectory of, and that then maybe often it's people who sort of arrive in their 40s and think, I want to make to take a bit of a turn here and do something that feels more meaningful. They end up maybe jumping over to the not-for-profit sector or other kind of purpose-led spaces. That's one good thing to do, I think, is kind of explore any causes that you might be passionate about and start to look into them and who's doing what, maybe volunteer.
That's a great idea.
There's lots of kind of skilled volunteering programs that you can do. You don't have to just go and paint a wall or mind a puppy. You might be able to put your actual skills into practice in some of these organisations too, and then just get a feel for what's happening and the people, I guess, knowing the kinds of people you want to be around too, that could sort of draw you in a particular direction.
Sort of being really tuned into one's your own emotions as well, I think can be very powerful. But I know so many people, given my great age, for whom life hasn't got so awful that they're actually prepared to really think about why am I really supposed to be here, and yet at the same time it hasn't been a great life lived or a completely do you know what I mean? So it's sort of, you get to a point where you tolerate in a career or in a relationship or in a situation, you tolerate enough unhappiness because it is tolerable, but it's not a life lived with purpose or meaning either. So it hasn't got bad enough to really catalyse an exploration of self and why am I here? What do I feel strongly about? What am I prepared to do? So I think consciously stepping into that space of exploration and exploring your emotions more. And as you say, kind of thinking less of self and more of those around me. Volunteering is a fantastic way of doing that because you put yourself on the shelf for a period of time and you really are invested in, how others are coping with life. And there's so much impact from a personal point of view that can come from that, for sure.
I also think that it's probably the recognition that over time that can change for people as well. Through your age, lived experiences, things will become or more important to you at different times. So checking in with yourself over periods of time to sort of reflect on whether, what you're doing right now has meaning, right now, or is this still, has this been something that I've been interested in? Even, I guess, maybe actually even looking back at childhood and saying, what did I enjoy as a kid? And is there something that can influence what you're doing now that comes from a real passion that can turn into purpose later on?
That's right. There's a really lovely process you can do too. Like one thing you could do is just free write and answer the question, what do I love? Just write for as long as you can without stopping, obviously, and judging what you're doing as you're going. Just free write, and it's amazing what can come out. And then actually to do the same again for what do I value? And it's fascinating to see what comes out on the page. And, sometimes I think we can just sort of be spinning in the same narrative in our heads or the same experiences week on week. And one of the great questions to ask ourselves, and I learnt this through the poet I mentioned earlier, David White, is to ask ourselves the question, what's the conversation I need to stop? And it kind of lets you lean into, firstly, the unknown a little bit. And, when people just can become so sick of themselves and it's at that point you're like, what's the conversation that I need to stop? And it could be that, you're running a narrative around in your own mind that life's just hard. It's hard for everyone. This is the lot in life. I really would love to be doing this, but I have to be doing this. And when you just commit yourself to stopping that conversation, it just creates this space, and that can be scary, I think, for a lot of people too. So it's probably why a lot of people don't stop the conversation because the space is filled with the unknown, and human beings generally don't like that, do they? Not knowing and not having certainty. But when you can kind of just hold yourself in that, it's amazing where it can take you.
Mel, what legacy or impact do you hope to leave behind?
We have a pretty audacious mission at Humans of Purpose. We want to change the futures of 1 million women and children by 2040. And that's the legacy that I'd love to leave, that we were able to brighten the future of those next generations, really, through this part of my time left.
Mel, what an inspiring story, and great way for us to start our day very early here in the UK. And I'm very mindful that you're at the other end of your day in Australia, so we're very grateful for your time.
I'm really grateful too. Thank you so much. Yeah, this is very early for you. Well done. And it's been great to have the conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
And we wish you and your team and all of the people involved in the work you do all the very best.
Thank you so much.
So I just feel completely enthused and motivated by, that conversation with Mel. I think her efforts so far with Humans of Purpose, having transformed the lives of hundreds of women already, and her aim by 2040 to change the lives of 1 million women and children is completely inspiring. I think she also makes me really excited about the future of businesses that are up and coming, that hopefully will build positive social impact ventures as part of their model, meaning that it isn't only about increasing profits year by year. You can make money, employ brilliant people, and be contributing towards a cause that you care about. So hopefully seeing more organisations do this from the start is going to become the norm. She was also just so energising to have a conversation with, and I think that a lot of that was to do with her strong sense of conviction and confidence.
Yeah, what an amazing person. And as you say, how energising to talk to someone who's got such a strong sense of meaning to what they do. In fact, if I think back over the years to the individuals who've left a lasting impression on me, or who've moved me to action, or who've convinced me to take on something challenging, they've always had that passion, enthusiasm and optimism. And also they felt real and authentic to me. And I guess that comes from the fact that, their beliefs and their values and what they stand for and what's important to them kind of comes across so strongly. And paradoxically, being in their company can feel both exciting or risky even, and yet somehow safe at the same time. And I guess that comes from a sort of a trust that builds and that evolves as you spend time with people that are so clear on why they're here. And there's something else they have as well, I think, which is that, arguably one of the most attractive qualities, which is humility. Earlier when we were speaking with Mel, I mentioned it, but that strong sense of purpose or meaning is often linked to something greater than themselves. So if I think of my father-in-law, for example, and his team's groundbreaking research into diabetes, or my friend Darren and his tireless work making sport available to kids from less privileged backgrounds, or indeed Claire Box, if you think back to Series 1, Episode 1, in fact.
Yes, it was. Of
the Being Human podcast, where we talked to Claire about the work she does with the Real Junk Food Project. Purpose-led people are just good to be around. Their zest for life is contagious.
Well, Jez, we've been talking about passions, purpose and more, but, not all of life's pursuits are that inspiring to others, are they?
No, I see where this is going. It's time for boring things about me, isn't it?
Boring things about me.
We can't forget to celebrate the mundane, dull and boring parts of being human that do make up at least 90% of our lives. But go on, Jez, you kick us off.
Would you like to hear about my addiction to the Amazon locker at the Shell garage?
I would love to.
Okay, so a few weeks ago I ordered a book all about how data has revolutionised professional sport. It's a fascinating read, by the way. And I noticed when I was ordering it on Amazon that in the delivery options that I could have the book delivered to the local petrol station and then pick it up there whenever suited me. Now, there's nothing new there, I appreciate. As always, I'm late to the party. So I got the message that my package was ready to pick up. So I wandered down, followed the instructions, wondering which of these kind of handleless locker doors held my treasure and how I was actually going to open it. And then ping. And with this incredibly satisfying noise and a really gentle kind of swinging action, this little door popped open and there was my bounty. I remember thinking it was like the very first time that I opened an advent calendar window and I was hooked. So now any and all deliveries go there. And I get to experience that magic again and again and again as the door pings and swings open.
Are you ordering things that perhaps you don't necessarily need just as an excuse to go down?
No, I don't think it's that bad. But the moment I realised that this had become a bit of a thing was the other evening when I told Rebecca that I was taking Dennis the dog out for a last leg stretch. It must have been about 10 p.m. And she said to me, "Oh, are you popping down the Amazon locker then?"
So walking Dennis is just an excuse.
What about you, Amelia?
Well, although my weekend away was lots of fun, there was one sort of episode which I thought could make quite a good boring things about me.
Come on then.
On Saturday evening, we were all sat round a fire pit deciding what we were going to do in the morning of Sunday. And I remembered that as we drove down to the Airbnb, there was a large sign that had said Village Fair last weekend in August. So and I was like, well, that'd be perfect to kill a couple of hours before we were heading for plans in the afternoon. So we got Googling and were very excited about the agenda, marrow competition, best carrot cakes. I think there was something about sort of kings and queens of the village being announced. But it was due to start at 12:30 and there was loads of information about how the roads were going to be closed. So, beware of traffic, etc. Now, this is quite typical of my family anyway, but because of the road closures, we set off nice and early. So 11 a.m. we were in this town waiting for the village fair to kick off. But as we were wandering around, there wasn't really a sense of kind of the hustle and bustle that we kind of thought there would be. And we did see a tractor that was driving with some road signs around. So we thought they must be about to close the road. But anyway, an hour we've been wandering around this very small village, failed to find a cafe. But because it was sort of 12 o'clock now, the local pub had opened. So we went in for a coffee where we overheard some excitement about the village. So we decided to join in on the conversation and ask some of the locals how it was going. And that was when we found out that the fair was on the last Saturday in August, not on the Sunday, which we all had in our heads. So we had arrived 24 hours late to a village fair, which was a total failure on our behalf. And it turns out that the tractor with the road signs was collecting all of them back in rather than getting ready to put all of the road closure signs back out. So, we had a lovely little wander around a village waiting for a fair that was never going to open.
Thank you for listening to the Being Human podcast.
Do hit the follow button and leave us a review on whatever platform you are using.
And as always, we would love to hear from you. So if you've got suggestions on topics you'd like us to explore, or if you think you'd make a brilliant guest, or if you'd like to talk to us and the team in Australia about the work we are delivering across the world with Just Add Water, we would love to hear from you.
Please do get in touch. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to the Being Human podcast. Brought to you by Just Add Water. Nurturing individual brilliance, forging collective strength.
One, two, three, four, five. Chris is about to take a photo, so
Smile.
Smile.
No resting bitch faces here.
Yeah, tummy's in. Tummy's in.
Yeah, baggy. Hang on.
And just for safety, Jez, on that top line, can I just get an alt version that's slightly more energised?
I thought the same.
Yeah. So did I actually. And had you not said so, I would have been the first to point it out as well. Competitive analysis of self.